between our members of the community and the broader isotope sector as well. So if you do have any questions, there will be again, as I said, a Q&A portion towards the end of the session. Also encourage you to reach out to our key contact from the CNIC side, Melody Grieve, or myself following this webinar if you are interested, obviously, in connecting more closely with NPX or the CSA as the study develops. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Renat from the CSA to say a few words about their participation in the study, and we'll get things started this morning. Thank you.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to NPX and CNIC for organizing this webinar. So great to see so many people already tuning in into this. So it's very encouraging to see such a turnout across the nuclear sector in Canada. So just to introduce myself, so my name is Renat Rashapov. I'm a senior engineer in the Space Exploration Directorate at the Canadian Space Agency. And I work together with Adam LaRue, who's also on the screen, who also works with me in the same team. And so we recently contracted NPX in collaboration with CNIC to conduct this feasibility study to see whether it's feasible to produce Pu-38 radioisotopes in Canada for the use of applying them or using them in space. And so that's, as you may know, there's been a lot of activities lately in space. Recently, there's been some news. The Artemis mission, Artemis 2 mission, has been pushed back by a year. However, there's still lots of activities going on, and we want to make sure that Canada plays an important role globally to advance human exploration in deep space. So that includes activities on the moon, on the Mars. And obviously, we work with partners such as NASA, ESA, and JAXA on various programs, including the Artemis program that's recently been the focus. So in exploration planning, we look at investments and pre-projects at a very early stage. And so what we try to do, Adam and I and the team, through the contract such as this one, is to try to mature the studies and mature the pre-project work to get to a point where we are comfortable enough to commit a large investment. And so we're looking at the scope of Canadarm3, which is roughly $1 to $2 billion currently. This obviously power generation and distribution, that's one aspect that we're looking at. So this is where this study will fall under. There are other areas that we're looking at, such as food production, healthcare systems in space, in situ resource utilization. However, this nuclear aspect is a very important one for us because it enables us to do things on the lunar surface. Any of those things that I just mentioned, they require power. So this is kind of what we're looking at, and we are hoping to try to merge the Canadian nuclear sector with the Canadian space sector, which are both very strong, mature sectors. So there's quite the niche here, and this is exactly the type of work that falls under this cross section. So recently, there's actually been an announcement by the government of Canada, roughly $1.2 billion to develop the Canadian utility rover. And so this is kind of the type of announcement that would come out of studies such as this one. And so we are obviously very early on, and we're very excited to kickstart this and get this going and see whether Canada does have the capabilities and whether it's economically feasible to do this. So as I mentioned, we contracted NPX in collaboration with CNIC to do this feasibility study. At this point, obviously, there's no funding committed, but we hope in the future that we can develop this enough until we get to that point. And so therefore, it's important, obviously, to engage all the stakeholders, such as you. So we're very happy to see such a good representation of the nuclear sector, including academia, industry, and the research organizations. And so the success, obviously, of this study will depend on the input from all of you. So we are very hopeful that you'll take part of this and ask questions, get engaged. And so with that, I'll close my remarks, and we'll kick it off. I'll pass it over to Andrew, back to Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Renaud.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the remarks. So I'm going to turn over the presentation to Pratik Gandhi, who is with NPX, who's the project manager of this exploration. Pratik's presentation should be roughly 20-30 minutes, at which time there will then be questions after. So Pratik, over to you. It's all yours.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm just going to share my screen here, or rather share the slides. If you can let me know when you can see it. Good, okay. All right, so just to introduce myself really quickly, my name is Pratik Gandhi. I work with NPX. We've been contracted by the CSA to perform this study. Personally, I've been looking into nuclear power and space applications for the last 2 to 3 years at this point. And I really noticed that there's a kind of niche area where Canada could be able to contribute as well on the global spacefaring endeavors. So I was really trying to push for just for us to kind of understand what Canada can do, how can we play a role. And I'm really happy that we get to take part in this study, and really excited to see all the engagement from 61 people on this call as well. So I'll just jump into it here as well. So I'll just go over the agenda really quickly. So first, I'll just get right to the point, talk about the purpose and the problem statement of the study, what objectives we're trying to understand. Then I'll kind of talk about a bit about the background context to help you understand a bit more of how nuclear power is used in space, and then more specifically this application as well. Just a quick note on the team structure, how we're approaching the study, what your involvement would be as one of the stakeholders in the Canadian nuclear isotopes industry, and then what your benefit would be by participating as well. Just some quick next steps for the coming week, and then we can go into some more questions as well. So really the purpose and the problem statement of the study. So I know Renat kind of touched on it as well, but really we're seeing a lot more expansion and a lot more interest from space agencies around the world trying to really expand their operations into space. Because of this, the Canadian Space Agency is forecasting an increased demand for plutonium-238. This isotope is used in radioisotope power systems for deep space exploration. So things like rovers, smaller robots, things that have been being flown by NASA since the 1950s. These really use plutonium-238 as their power source as well. Right now, a lot of the plutonium-238 is produced within the US, but the CSA is suspecting that this production by the US is not going to be able to meet the forecasted demand. Really, so we want to see if Canada, the nuclear industry, the isotopes industry in Canada, we already produce medical isotopes. Is it possible for us to also add this plutonium-238 isotope into the existing supply chain and help to alleviate that upcoming demand? So at a high level, when we talk about the study objective, so really it is around the technical and economic viability of using the Canadian nuclear isotope supply chain to produce plutonium-238. So essentially, we want to understand the end-to-end production costs for this production of plutonium-238. So that'll be starting with the sourcing of the source material, which is neptunium-237, going into the actual irradiation of the neptunium into plutonium, and then finally the separation into that irradiated product. So within this kind of supply chain, we want to understand for each step, what are the costs, what is the economic feasibility, what is the technical capability, even the transport of materials from one area to the other. What does that look like? What are some special considerations? Is there sort of like any sort of licensing or regulatory impact on existing medical isotope infrastructure technology as well that may need to be upgraded in this production process? Ideally, if we can kind of come out with a procedural flow of how plutonium-238 would be produced within the supply chain, that is the best result I think we can get from the study. If we can have a few options, understanding who are the possible producers, where can we source the material from, who are the different agencies or companies that can provide transport of material as well. Just understanding from a whole bird's eye view, the whole framework for the production process, I think that is going to be the end goal of our study. So I'll just talk a bit more about the background context for nuclear in space. So I know it's a bit of a niche area, but nuclear in space has been looked at for quite a while right now. There are 3 main applications. So the first one is called fission surface power. This is basically putting nuclear reactors on the surface of the moon and the surface of Mars. There's another one called nuclear propulsion. So this is basically putting a nuclear reactor inside of a rocket engine and using that to provide thrust as opposed to conventional chemical combustion. And then the other one is radioisotope power systems, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So essentially, as radioisotopes decay, they release heat. This heat is converted into electricity, and that electricity is actually used to power things like rovers, robotics, small spacecraft, things like that. The applications or the order of magnitude for power that comes from this is just in the watts, so maybe a few hundred watts are produced. But because the power is so reliable because of the half-life of plutonium-238, and because it's such a small and low mass type of power source as well, it's really ideal for things like robots, things like rovers, things that can kind of go deeper in space. Maybe the sun is not there strong enough to provide solar power, but in this case, nuclear power can actually be used for these applications as well. Just kind of give you a quick overview. So NASA has actually been flying these radioisotope power systems since the 1950s, 1960s. This graphic is kind of a big overview of all the different missions that they have flown before that have used radioisotope power. So whether it's RHUs, which is radioisotope heater units, just to provide heat, or RTGs, radioisotope thermoelectric generators, which is used to provide electricity. These have been flown for quite a while, and there are missions upcoming as well. So I think if you look more to the right of this graphic, there's a mission called Dragonfly. That one is going to be flying around 2027 tentatively, and that one is going to be using radioisotope power as well, powered by plutonium-238. Talk a bit more about the plutonium-238 production process. So essentially, this isotope is created through the neutron irradiation of neptunium-237, and then the subsequent beta decay of neptunium-238. So essentially, we would take a fabricated target of neptunium-237, subject to irradiation in a reactor or some sort of cyclotron, anything that can bombard it with neutrons. And then over the next 2 or 3 days, it would decay into plutonium-238, which then has quite a long half-life, which can be used and then manufactured into fuel pellets for these radioisotope systems. So NASA and the US, they used to produce a lot of plutonium-238 back in the 1980s, but then they halted their production of that. They recently restarted it back in, I think, around like 2010, plus or minus a few years. But really, because of all the upcoming missions and a lot more of the demand we're seeing from not just NASA, but like even other space agencies across the world in Asia and Europe as well, there is a big demand or upcoming forecasted demand for plutonium-238 as more space agencies look to fly their own RPS missions as well. When it comes to how the Canadian nuclear industry can support this, so really we see that right now there are a lot of medical isotopes being produced out of Canada. Canada is a global leader when it comes to medical isotope production. We understand that the supply chain in Canada is very well robust, and a lot of infrastructure has been developed to support this medical isotope production as well. We think we can leverage the existing medical isotope infrastructure in Canada to help support the production of plutonium-238 as well. So really, we're looking for your support as the CNIC members to really see if this is possible and if this is feasible from your end, both economically and technically. Just a bit of a graphic of kind of how the production process or how the collaboration works in the US right now. So first, we can see like on this graphic, in the US for plutonium-238 production, it's really a sort of nationwide cooperation, right? So we have the Idaho National Laboratory. They get the neptunium, they send it to Oak Ridge for irradiation. It gets sent back to Los Alamos for some more preparation. There's some final processing steps at the Idaho National Laboratory again, and then finally gets sent to NASA for flying up into RPS systems. The reason I'm showing you this graphic is it will be very, like, ideally our end goal, even beyond the study, would be to develop something like this in Canada, where we can kind of show a map of Canada, see how this isotope is being produced in Canada and all the existing stakeholders that are supporting this supply chain as well. So really more of an inspiration type of slide, but just to kind of show that this is sort of what we're looking to do in Canada as well, and see if it's really possible for us to kind of have a nationwide cooperation within Canada as well, and see if we can produce this isotope too. I'll just talk a bit more about the team structure, just a short note on this. So the Canadian Space Agency is contracting NPX, and then we are collaborating with the CNIC to essentially perform this study. So hoping to engage the CNIC members. I know I'll put a few key members on the screen here, but obviously we're looking for the entire consortium of members and the entire supply chain itself. But really, getting your engagement from the supply chain all across the board is going to be crucial to ensuring a successful study. And really, we're hoping that we can get a lot of engagement, a lot of participation in this, because we're really looking forward to seeing where this goes and hoping that it leads to bigger things coming in the future. In terms of the approach to the study, so essentially, I kind of mentioned in passing, but this is kind of a bit more of a high-level outline. We're looking to understand the total supply chain from end to end. So this starts from the target supply, neptunium, transporting it for irradiation, actually perform the irradiation of neptunium, transferring again for separation into the plutonium, doing the separation, getting it out, manufacturing to plutonium fuel pellets, and then essentially selling it to the end customer, whoever that may be. So really, for each of these areas, we're looking to identify who could be a service provider, what are the costs associated with each step, what are any production rates that we can get of plutonium-238, what is the extraction yields, things like that, and any sort of licensing and regulatory impacts. I know a lot of entities right now, like maybe we do irradiation for medical isotopes. We're looking to understand what is the regulatory impact if you're going to throw in some neptunium to irradiate as well. Is that going to be a huge sort of effort to get that approved, or is that going to be something that can be done relatively easy? Right now, these are some things that are unknown, but we're looking to really flesh it out over the course of the study to really identify what is the impact going to be on the existing supply chain. In terms of the specific inputs that we're looking for, a lot of it is just going to be around questions that we're going to be kind of grouping into these 4 different categories. So it's going to be mainly for target supply, irradiation of the actual neptunium, transportation, and then the separation of the plutonium from the irradiated target. So really, a lot of these questions, we're looking for kind of the CNIC members to kind of raise their hand saying that they're going to contribute to this category. They can provide some information for this category. And then we're looking to understand the different sort of cost considerations, regulatory considerations, things like that associated with each different category here. Kind of get to the part of why you'd want to participate in this. So I would say that this is, first and foremost, this is a new line of business that your organization could develop as well. Right now, if you're involved in the production of medical isotopes, whether it's transporting or actual irradiation or even the separation, this could be a new revenue stream for you as well, as the forecasted demand for plutonium is expected to increase. So this could be a more lucrative opportunity for your organization in the future. I think that being able to produce isotopes that are not just solely for medical use, it still does benefit the medical isotope infrastructure and operations indirectly. I think it does help prop up the existing infrastructure and be able to bolster the existing operations as well for medical isotopes as well. So I think a really kind of synergistic relationship here between medical isotopes and non-medical isotopes as well. Like, just because you're producing one doesn't mean that the other one cannot benefit to the production of the other as well. And just in general, being able to support worldwide efforts for space exploration directly benefiting humanity as well. So really, your organization can play a part in supporting not just the Canadian Space Agency, but it could be like NASA, it could be the ESA, it could be one of the space agencies, one of the Asian countries as well. It will be very beneficial for your company to be able to support one of these international agencies as well, playing a role in providing fuel for their missions. In terms of the outcomes of the study, so really, this study is kind of just the starting point. We're hoping that it sets the stage for a deeper dive into plutonium production in Canada. Essentially, while we're going to be putting things at a high level in the study, the outcomes or the follow-ups could be that we'd be looking to understand each aspect of the study in a bit more detail. So whether it's going to be the target supply or the actual irradiation, transportation, or the separation of the plutonium, really, we can get into a lot more detail for each of those separate aspects, and that's where study participants would then be contacted to understand for any follow-up steps or how we can understand a bit more in detail for what they said that they can contribute for. In terms of our timeline, so our timeline for this study is very short, which is why we can't dive too deep into it, but we're still looking to get as much information as we can. The study as a whole needs to wrap up by the end of March. So really, from today, we're looking at probably like an 8-week timeline, maybe like a 9-week timeline. So we're looking to move pretty quick here. We're kind of laying all our foundation right now, just so that we can sort of get into these discussions with study participants, understand how they can support more, and then really start writing the study itself. But really, if I kind of go over like what's upcoming, so for this month in January, we're going to be sending out the initial survey for all of the participants to not only confirm their participation, but begin to answer some of the questions. In February, we're going to be focusing a lot on follow-up discussions and being able to talk with another company that did a similar study in Europe as well. So hoping to benchmark their study and see what other inputs we could be getting. And then really wrap things up in March where we can deliver this completed study to the CSA by the end of March. In terms of next steps, so I think you can click this from the Microsoft Teams presentation as well. But really, we're looking for people to finally officially confirm their participation, and then also the specific area that they will participate in as well. By the end of this week, those who have confirmed, will be sending them a questionnaire where they can start to answer some of the more detailed questions. Hopefully looking to get those back within a week, but obviously understand that that might need some more time. But really, from then on, we can begin to set up some more follow-up meetings and really deep dive into some of the aspects of the study with the participants. Right now, that's all I had. I know I have some frequently asked questions slides, Andrew, but did you want to say anything before I talk about any questions?
No, let's, if you want to go over the frequently asked questions, because again, maybe it is something that someone will have prior to raising their hand. I just wanted to note that this is being recorded. So if you don't feel comfortable coming on your camera to ask the question, please feel free to put it in the chat. We will have access to that as well. And again, if you are someone who wants to refer back to this presentation, it will eventually end up on the CNIC website within the next 48 to 72 hours. So there will be access to that as well. So Pratik, if you want to go over the frequently asked questions, and then we'll take some questions. And then I think maybe going back to this slide, because people can directly click the form. I noticed it was added to the chat as well. But just start with what you guys have outlined as well. Yeah.
Sure. So I know we sent last week some RSVP form for the webinar itself and asked some people to provide questions from there. So these are some of the questions that we did notice pop up. So the first question, does plutonium pose any weapons or proliferation risk? So plutonium-238, the isotope used in RPS systems, this is non-weapons grade plutonium. So this one, plutonium-238, does not pose any sort of weapons risk, and it is non-fissile, so it cannot be used in any sort of bombs or anything like that. It is a alpha emitter, so that will need to be taken into account, but in terms of weapons risk, there is no risk. Next question, who's funding the study? Are there any other agencies involved? So the Canadian Space Agency is directly funding the study, and there's no other space agencies involved. The Canadian Space Agency may share the results of the study with other space agencies, but not the actual study itself. So really, the actual final product is just meant for the Canadian Space Agency's hands. What are the current impediments to large-scale commercial production of plutonium-238? So really, the largest challenge is going to be sourcing that neptunium-237 supply. Right now, we're looking to understand if anyone in the CNIC or any other industry partners would be able to give some insight onto this reliable source of neptunium-237, but really, this poses the biggest roadblock, I would say, in terms of plutonium-238 production within Canada. Obviously, throughout this process, we want to understand in the whole supply chain if there are any other roadblocks or anything like that. But right now, the biggest one that we're aware of is the neptunium-237 sourcing. Will the results of the study be shared with participants? So as I mentioned previously, because we're going to be getting a lot of information from different participants and different entities, some of them may be economic information as well. We're not going to be distributing the report to the participants, but they will be contacted for any follow-ups accordingly if the CSA decides to pursue that route. The actual report itself, again, will be shared with the CSA, but they will not be sharing it with the other space agencies. They may share the findings, but not the actual report itself. Who is the end customer of the plutonium-238 isotopes? So really, these isotopes produced in Canada are intended to be provided for space agencies across the world. So this could be someone like NASA, it could be the European Space Agency. But right now in Canada, there's no plans to fly RPS missions. So all of the isotopes that are produced in Canada, they would be sourced or sold internationally to other agencies or other companies that are looking to fly RPS missions.
Perfect. I think that's a good start. If you want to go back to the next step slide, Pratik, just so people can click the form. I do notice a question in the chat, so we'll get there with that. If you do have another question, please feel free to put it in the chat, raise your hand, and I will call upon you as we have time. But the first question from Neil is, does the IAEA, excuse me, agree with the view on the proliferation risk? My understanding is that while it is harder to make a weapon with 238, it is still possible. I know there are probably still some folks from the CSA and Pratik online to potentially answer this question. If not, we can certainly get back to Neil with more information as well.
Yeah, I guess I can take a crack at it. So as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen anything where they've sort of raised any issues to it. But again, that's something that we do want to look into as part of the study. When it comes to understanding the regulatory impacts and the licensing impacts, like we want to understand, even from the CNSC as well, like if, let's say, some company decides to start irradiating neptunium for plutonium-238, is that going to be posing a big regulatory risk to them? Is it going to make the process unfeasible, things like that? So it's something that we'd be looking into as part of the study, but definitely a good question and something for us to take into account.
I see that Susie has her hand up, so I'll hand it over to her.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. Just wanted to first say that I'm super excited about this study, and I commend your collaborative outreach. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that a lot of people on this call are going to be able to help you meet this tight deadline. I guess a humble flex, Calian, my company, led the study for Bruce Power and MB Power, looking at the technical and economic feasibility of producing isotopes in their assets. And we did look at plutonium-238, identifying it as an interesting isotope. And maybe I'll just share with you what our findings. Neptunium-237, the target material to make plutonium-238, the sole supplier of the Western world is the US DOE. And you know, then we asked the question, can we make NP-237? And it requires it is formed from the decay of americinium-241, which is already radioactive. So we stopped there, but just wondering if, as part of the study, you would explore, I guess, holding commercial agreements with the US DOE and firming up your supply there. Is that something that should be considered?
Yeah, so that is one big consideration that we are looking at for this as well. Like when it comes to identifying the suppliers of neptunium-237, we are aware that the US is probably going to be the best bet for that sort of road. But we can, at least as part of the study, we can take the first steps to start those commercial agreements, or at least float it to the US and see what they think. But the outcome of the study won't actually be like we'll have a commercial agreement in place, but it is something that we'd be looking at as part of the study as well. It's also good to hear that you guys have looked at this in the past too.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. So again, the benefit I think of really bringing the CNIC in here is we have relationships across the world. We're obviously the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, but we do have relationships with the DOE in the States, given the fact that they run the isotope program, and international, and there's some folks online internationally as well. So we're really going to help make the connections that are necessary to kind of bring the largest success to this project possible. I see Richard Weens from Nordion with his hand up, so I'll hand it over to him.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. I was just going to reiterate one point, which is around the regulatory position on this isotope from an export perspective, right? So the CNSC and the Canadian government writ large has a policy on what isotopes you can and can't send around the world, depending on what their end use is. And we just want to make sure that they, again, didn't have the perspective, the Canadian government didn't have the perspective that this was somehow related to, and I'd say it's even more broad than weapons, right? It's defense. So you can make an argument that if you've got space programs that are defense related, that the Canadian government would have something to say about exporting. But that's, that's for down the road. My real question is around, and maybe you covered this and I just missed it, around the kind of the size of the prize here. Like, is there an estimate of what the market actually looks like today, what it could be? As excited as everybody is about participating in something like this, generally speaking, we're all for-profit companies and we make investments where it makes sense. So just want to get a sense of breadbox or elephant here, right? Are we talking about a couple $1 million market? It feels to me like it's much larger than that, but do you have estimates of sort of what the market is, where it could go, et cetera?
Yeah, so something as part of the study we want to identify is kind of what the costs to sell this isotope would be. That'll help kind of define the market expectations. I don't know if Renat or Adam from the CSA, from your expectations, like if you have anything to say about what you think this could like kind of turn into in the future as well.
Yeah, so we don't have a figure that, even ballpark figure, just because it's heavily dependent on like missions that actually get approved. And so it's a little bit of chicken and egg thing where, can we fly missions, but then there's no radioisotopes and vice versa. So, and we are expecting that this will increase over the next decade, and especially not just to the moon, but further into a deep space. So, but and I think this will flow a little bit also into the demand calculations. It's very dependent on missions getting approved, which means budget being allocated by the government, for example, not just by the Canadian government, but also by NASA, for example, or by the US, who would use such a RPS system. So there is, however, we do see that this niche, there's definitely potential in there, but in terms of what the dollar amount is to that, it's hard to tell, I think, at this point.
Yeah, sorry, just one further question then. Has there been consideration for other isotopes? So I recognize that Pu-238 is kind of the incumbent because of its sort of low shielding and therefore shielding weight requirements and long half-life. But there are other isotopes out there that have been considered for RPS and RTG, and I was wondering whether whether that was within the scope of this study, or we just focused on 238.
Yes, that's a good question. I think given just the short the timeline, we focused on Pu-238 for now. There are other isotopes, like you said. I think americium-241 was already mentioned. There's strontium-90 that could potentially also be interesting. But in the end, I think those are kind of the three main ones that have probably the most outlook for success to be commercialized, I think. There are other ones that have pros and cons, but they are challenging and expensive to produce. So
sorry, yeah. I missed the third one there. Pu-238, strontium-90, and
americium-241.
Got it. Thank you.
Which is the Europeans, for example, are actually looking at that one more closely than Pu-238, which is also fine. Like there's advantages to have that isotope over Pu-238 and vice versa. But at this point, just because the timeline is short, we kept the scope kind of narrow. It's already a lot to get some good results for this study. So we just excluded the other ones and are focusing on Pu-238.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, and I think that kind of picks up on Michael's question in the chat as well. But he mentioned thulium-170, which again is outside of the two isotopes, the additional two isotopes that Renat just mentioned. So I think potentially, depending on obviously how this first study goes, there's potential to look at what's next. And I think that would certainly be under consideration, but obviously just outside of the scope for this initial project. I see Kenneth with his hand up, so I'll hand it over to him.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Ken Lund. I'm with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. It's a very interesting presentation. I think it would certainly benefit space exploration in Canada if this project were to take place. I guess my question is in terms of the survey itself and the participants that will be sent to survey. I just want to make sure from a regulatory perspective that the right agencies are identified, right? I think this is not solely something to be sent to the CNSC. There's probably other agencies as well, like Transport or Environment Canada that might be involved. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the participant list from a regulatory standpoint, who you're going to be contacting?
Yeah, so right now our main consideration was going through to the CNSC for this as well. But of course, as overall, our whole participant list is going to be grouped into those 4 categories that I was mentioning previously. I'll just put those in here as well. But because we want to understand the regulatory impact from each of these 4 categories, we're hoping to identify other regulatory contacts that could be shown through any sort of transportation considerations, any sort of irradiation considerations, any sort of separation considerations as well. So really, right now we're looking to understand helping identify those individuals or those agencies from these 4 different area groups as well. So looking to just really get some more information from the participants on their own impact of regulations, and then from there, who can we contact to understand the impact more in depth.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Like I mentioned, since you're talking about end to end, so it's something that's involves other agencies as well, not just in a CNSC. So just a little reminder. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Kenneth. I mean, so obviously as Pratik shared in one of theirs, I think we do have a good cross section of the Canadian nuclear isotope sector. We are not certainly a complete circle. So I think a good opportunity actually through your comments is to engage with the CNIC, who obviously does a lot of the regulatory licensing on this as already, and some of the agencies that you guys may be engaged with, and engage more directly with you and your team or a member of your team to make sure that all of those agencies are included as well. So I think this is, again, kind of that jumping off point to start to bridge those collaborations, but a very good point. I don't see any other hands up at this point in time. Just a couple comments in the chat, which we will obviously take note of. Last chance for anyone to ask any questions if you have any. Okay. If not, again, thank you everyone for attending this morning. Again, please, if you are interested in even just getting more information about the study, fill out the form to connect with us, and we will reach out to you again from either NPX or CNIC side. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, this is a unique opportunity for the CNIC to be engaged in a study like this, and it's only made possible by the strength of our members. So thank you very much again for your time. Stay tuned for our next webinar, which I believe is February 7th in conjunction with the OCNI. You will start to see announcements and advertising for that today. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, is safe in the snow, and has an enjoyable Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.